There. Okay. It's so sad that I can't distinguish between F5 and F6 without my glasses. Okay, there we go. Okay, everything I have to read I consider important, but frankly, the readings for this week may be the most important readings to actually do in this entire class. I can say that because 25 years of reviewing troubled or failing software projects, almost all of the root causes you're going to find in this one lecture. There are other issues that someone will talk about, but this is really the heart of the matter. This is the stuff I go to as an expert witness when I'm actually reviewing a case and pouring through thousands of pages of documents and building a timeline, and I can point and say, that's where it went wrong, and this is why. And sadly, it's all the same reasons. And this is the reason why Mythical Man-Month is still in print. It's why I use it as a text for this class, even though Fred Brooks wrote all this. Let's see if I can do my math. 75, 25, no, 70, oh, recall. 55 years ago, is that right? No, 45? 45, 25 plus 20.
A while ago.
A while ago, 45 years ago, before any of you were done. What are the root causes of software release? And by the way, just a periodic reminder, my lecture is not intended as a substitute for reading. I assume that you actually are reading this stuff. The idea here is to discuss, touch on these and then get your feedback and observations. But, estimation. I was asked, there was someone posted a question on Quora every now and then. How many of you know what Quora is? Most of you. It's a social media site where people post questions, you answer. Anyone can answer it. About 90% of it is crap. That's Surgeon's Law. 90% of everything is crap. The theater surgeon was a famous science fiction author back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and he was being interviewed on TV about his latest novel and so on. And the interviewer, feeling very superior, said, "Well, isn't it true that 90% of science fiction is crap?" And his response was, "Yes, but 90% of everything is crap." That's a useful metric. We'll talk about metrics later. Our techniques, anyway, I was asked, what's the one thing that software engineers need to know that they may not going into the field? And I said, because that estimation is hard. It's really hard. Our techniques confuse effort with progress. We are uncertain of our estimates, and we're often not willing to say, "I don't know when we'll be done." We keep coming back to armor. There are things we don't know and we know we don't know. So we can sort of try to put a bounding box that, yeah, we think we can come up with a solution the next amount of time. But it's the things that we don't know we don't know. And we discover mid-project and say, "Oh my gosh, this is a disaster. We have to retool. We have to back up. We have to do something different. Or we have to throw out the features." Often we lack the courage to say we don't know when we'll be done. Scheduled progress is poorly monitored and hard to measure. We're going to talk a lot about that later on in the lecture. And when the schedule slips, the impulse is to add staff, which is like dousing a fire with gasoline. What have been your observations for those of you who've been in projects that turned out to be poorly estimated, which almost always means they were late, not that they were early. Occasionally you have projects where it's like, "Hey, we're done. This is great, okay?" Enjoy those when those happen. It's like winning a Super Bowl ring. It may be the only time in your life that happens. It's almost always, how many of you have had experiences where you've been on projects that have been like, yes?
Well, it wasn't really a programming project, but I was working for this company where we were scanning a whole bunch of old digital documents that were on a bunch of microfilm. And our boss wanted us to finish it within like a month, and it was like boxes upon boxes, and all the scanners had a lot of issues where you'd be scanning for 2 hours and they would just stop working. And they'd have all these complications. You couldn't focus the camera, you couldn't, and I don't think we ever got I mean, we eventually finished, but it definitely wasn't 9 months.
Okay. Other experiences? Yeah.
I was doing a project where I imagined I was going to like design it real quick, and then coding was going to be really hard. And then coding was really easy, but it took me like a month to figure out how to go about implementing it in the first place. Like I didn't know what like platform to use and how I even go about it. And that surprised me that it took me so long just to figure out how to start.
I've alluded to, and I will allude frequently to Pages, and the fact that Pages was a full year late in shipping. And I was responsible for the initial schedule. I did the initial schedule when we finally closed on venture funding. And one of the problems I had is that up to that point in my professional career, almost all my software projects were one-person projects. So I was basically doing my own estimating, and it's like I can do this and I can do that. And I had, professionally, a very good track record of bringing my projects in on time. And so I was asked to do this, and we had, 8 engineers, and I made an unconscious assumption that everyone thought and worked just like me, and I failed to consider the communication issue and the coordination issue. Oh, wait. This is so annoying. This is what happens when you buy something from Electronic Arts. Please log in. I don't want it. Anyway, and I failed to take that in consideration, and that was a dominant factor. And how differently, all bright, top-notch engineers, I'd hire any of them again. But there were communications issues, there were personality issues, and people didn't accomplish things the same way, and it was simply trying to keep the mindset common among everyone so that we were all solving problems in the same way. Next slide. Okay, next problem with estimation. All programmers are optimists. I think I've already quoted Adele Goldberg. Only optimists start to build complex systems. Pessimists are like, no, we'll never get that done. I'm more of a pessimist. If someone proposes a project, I look at it and say, nah. I've been there, done that. I don't have that many years left in my life. So we often assume that each task will only take as long as it ought to. Okay, all of you, give me some experiences. When have you had a particular task in a programming project or class, professional, whatever, and you thought it was going to take X amount of time, and it took much longer than that? Who wants to give me some examples? Yes?
My answer to gave one for pretty much every project.
Anyone have some specific examples you care to admit? Yes?
So, work with Qualtrics, and I was supposed to update the response generator, like randomize the responses, and it was supposed to add rating, so user-defined rating, so you can like specify this, you must answer this. But like I found out like the backend that a previous intern had written had never been validated, and I have been told it was. So yeah, I had to make sure that was all working and update it to the point that it would work and be scalable.
Who else? That's not a few more hands. Yes?
For my thesis, and one thing that was supposed to be just a little sidestep, I needed to map encodings on a unit sphere onto a simplex, and I was trying to do them in the same dimension, and it turns out after a bunch of math I realized that was impossible. And I had to change my technique.
Anyone else want to? Well, yes.
For a project at work, I had to do a file previewer and embed it inside of our main project. And they gave me 2 weeks to do that, and it ended about 6 months because the Windows API was broken.
Oh, yes, and we're going to talk about that. The fact that often you have dependencies upon systems that you have no control over. And that's, I came up in an era where early in my career, I was building systems where I wasn't relying on much of anything aside from some very basic operating system calls. And today you've got, libraries and APIs and so on out the wazoo. And that sets an upper bound on the predictability and quality of the system you're building. Because you can't guarantee that the operating system API actually works appropriately. And you've got to find out why it's broken and how to work around that breaking. The probability that a given task will go well may be relatively high. But a meaningful software project comprises hundreds, if not thousands, of such tasks. So it's kind of like, again, you have this inherent assumption, everything will go well. Nothing will take longer than it's supposed to take. Now we're going to talk later today on scheduling, and for PERT charts you have what's called a critical path. And that's a series of consecutive tasks such that any delay of any one of those tasks pushes out the overall deadline. The problem is that there are so many tasks involved that, and we'll see this quote later on. Well, actually, right, the next line, we'll do that one. It's very easy to lose a day on a software project. It is almost impossible to make it up. Remember that, because managers don't understand it. They don't understand how easy it is to lose time. That you run across a problem and it costs you 3 days. And if that's on a critical path, that's a 3-day slip in shipping. And almost always, you're not going to make it up. Oh, I'll just work some extra time this weekend. No, you spend the weekend butting your head against it. We're back to armor here. Now, and this is something we're going to talk about a lot through this course, what do you do when you're starting a new project, okay? You've got some great user interface tools, prototyping tools. You prototype it, you get the menu up, you get the screen up, you get windows, you have labels, and bam, 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 you're doing this. And you show this to management, and they say, that looks great, when can we ship? And it's kind of like, no, this is just a facade. There's nothing behind this. And they don't understand that. It's kind of like, why is it going to take you another year to ship this product? Because you've already shown me a whole user interface. My standing joke for many years was I wanted, and you don't have this in real world construction. If I, as an architect, do a scale model of a building, no one looks at it and says, when can we start moving furniture in? They realize it's a scale model. Well, a software prototype is like a scale model. It doesn't actually do anything, it just shows you what things are going to look like. And I've long joked that I wanted like a quarter-scale PC. And that all prototypes, you'd show on a quarter-scale PC and say, it's going to take us 6 months to make it work on a full-size laptop. And it just won't fit in this, so, don't start moving furniture. All right, I can kill this. Oh wait. Anyway, we tend to, yes?
Just on that last question, I think another way we tend to be a little bit optimistic is we confuse people and roles.
Oh yeah.
And we just assume that everyone who's a web developer is just as competent as any other web developer or database administrator or any other kind of IT role.
And that is an important part, and that's why we had the discussion earlier on talent, experience, professionalism, education, and skills. And I got a rather impassioned and good feedback on my article about that, and someone was questioning why they were doing computer science in the first place. And it's kind of, oh, well, welcome to the monkey house. Any one of those is not sufficient. And a lack of any one doesn't kill you. The point is that, and it really, what is most important to me in many respects after 45 years, is the professionalism. You don't do your work. If you're not as fast, if you're not grasping it, ask for help. Spend time with it, build your skills, gain the experience. I mean, you're all, how many of you are now trying to go out for job hires and you have not yet done an internship? So you literally have no experience. Not many, okay, a few. But you have the experience, no experience. They want you to have experience, but I don't have experience. How can I get it? Because I'm looking for an entry level. You find whatever job you can. and you stick with it for a year, and then you go get the job you want. That's true in any discipline. You face that same problem. But yes, you're back to a key issue that people aren't going to, and this was sort of the issue I had. I was chief architect. I've been thinking about pages for a year and a half by the time I put this together, and I pretty much had in my head how everything was going to work, and what I thought the basic problems were, though there were things that I didn't anticipate. If any of you ever do word processors, let me tell you, footnotes are a nightmare. Trying to do live updates of footnotes and deciding which page or which column they go in and shift them as the text changes is an absolute nightmare. Any other thoughts about how we tend to be overly optimistic? We actually have some more ideas to go through, but anyone else? Okay, the Man-Month. Hence the title of it. This is the classic thing of why don't we just double the staff and get it done in half the time. There is an inherent incompressibility to software. And this has to do, back with Armor, about the amount of invention, the amount of unknowledge you have to go through to gain knowledge. The amount of discovery and invention. You can't, Brooks is always cited for this, but Jerry Weinberg actually said the same thing in Psychology of Computer Programming 4 years earlier, which is, you can't get 9 women together to make a baby in 1 month. That's exactly what managers think they can do with programmers. Yes?
It sounds like Ondel's law. It's just, you can't parallelize stuff.
Yeah.
Because of the communication bottleneck.
Well, there's a number of reasons why you can't parallelize. It's not just communication, but that's a key part. And that's why adding people makes things later. How many of you had the experience of having someone join your software project in progress and the amount of time it takes to bring that person up to speed until they are actively contributing? You had that problem? What was your experience?
I was that person. And I didn't know much, and it took me a whole semester before I knew much to be able to do enough. And then that team got dissolved. So.
Yeah. Boy, that's often the case. Other experiences with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just same type of thing. Like we work on a project and someone new comes on and takes them depending on the person, but somebody relatively newer, it takes like 3 months to get up to speed and like fully as good as everyone else.
And how much time are other people spending trying to get this person up to speed?
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
That's why you have adding people lengthens, not shortens the schedule. Now there are cases under which you can do this, and this is talked about some in Accelerate. If you have a sufficiently partitioned architecture, such that you have individual components with well-defined interfaces, then you can add people to a given component without affecting anyone else, because they don't care about the people, they don't have to communicate, all they care about the API. As long as you hold the API steady, they can't see it. But Brooks, and you'll see this in whatever it is, chapter 17, when he goes back and revisits his own writing. He says this is still a good zero order estimate as a law. Yeah.
Is this, so there's an initial learning curve whenever someone comes into a project. If your goal, deployment date is 5 years away, and it takes 6 months to train people, could you still potentially save time? So is this kind of scope limited, this statement that adding people?
That's a good point. Well, and this is why he says specifically adding people to a late project makes it later. Because that's often the response. It's like, oh my gosh, we have to ship in 6 months, we're not going to make it, let's hire 3 more people. If you're 5 years out and you're still building your team, I was at Pages. I spent a year and a half adding people. And it was only after we had everyone on board that we established a schedule and said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and I was still off by a year. Now, I'm not sure why I added this question to the slide, but this is a good point. What's been your observation with the opposite problem? What is the impact of personnel turnover within the development? Yes?
A lot less bugs.
In one particular case I'm thinking of.
And why was that?
The developer lowered the average productivity
of the quote I gave back in the lecture on hiring people from when I took 404. And the guy who worked in industry for 20 years said if you knew which ones to take, you could take half of all the people working in data processing out and shoot them. And not only would no deadlines be missed, many would be advanced. So yes, turnover, if it's the right people who are leaving or dismissed, can be very beneficial. What happens when it's a key developer? Have any of you seen that? Yes?
So in Dr. Zapala's lab, we're working on a system that a PhD student made for his dissertation. It's an awesome system, but then he left. And we're now trying to take it from a prototype to something that's fully functioning. And there's been a couple times where he's been able to check in with us and help us out, but there's so much knowledge that he took with him that we've had to rediscover for 4 months.
And this is why it's important to keep your team intact, at least keep the good people, drive away the less good people. At Pages, and then again, I'll ask you to forgive me if I repeat stuff because I've been teaching this for my 7th semester, and I never quite keep straight what stories I've told. But I've mentioned that I've butted heads several times with our CFO, John Curry. Great guy, kept us, financially tight. I have learned a tremendous amount, have tremendous respect. But he would do things like that. We used to have free snacks in the kitchen. It's like M&Ms and soda. That was it. I mean, we're not talking, Odwalla juices and, having masseuses come around and give people massage. It was M&Ms and soda. And it was probably costing a couple $100 a month. And he thought about cutting it. I said, no. I said, you don't understand. If we
Don't close the
Process.
There we go. That's a good idea.
Burn it.
Should have thought of that. I said, you don't understand, John. If we lose one developer, I said, we're setting ourselves back months. I said, we cannot save enough money by getting rid of snacks to justify the risk of losing one developer. Okay, let's just click that in there. There we go. Okay, another thing he brings up, and boy, this is, I can tell you again from all the various projects I've reviewed over the past 25 years, this is a major, major issue. We always underestimate the time it will take to debug the system and get it ready to ship. Always. Brooks, and people sort of, their heads explode. You look at Brooks and he says, 50% of your time will be spent on testing. Nobody budgets 50% of their time for testing. And his response is, no, but it's what they spend anyway. And that's why you get these projects where it's like, we're going to ship in 1 year, and they ship in 2 years. Why? Because they spent another year trying to get all the bugs out. And this is exacerbated when you do all the easy stuff up front, and you're getting towards what you think is a shipping date, and it's all your hardest problems are left. And you can't figure out how to solve them, and you're having a hard time figuring out how to debug them. The 90-90 rule, I think I've already quoted it in here, and this isn't with me, this has been around for decades, that the first 90% of your work takes 90% of the schedule, and the last 10% of your work takes the other 90% of your schedule. We'll talk about 90% as a metric in a little while. But we underestimate system testing, integration, end-to-end performance, and stress. There was a project at a major credit card company that I ended up reviewing 3 times. First time I went in, we had someone come in to review the architecture part of the company I was with, OSG. And he pointed out this was a migration off of legacy mainframes into a object-based system running on Unix workstations. And so they had a 2-hour window every night in which they would stop accepting charges and they had to process all the credit card charges during those 2 hours, update all the databases and so on. With the system they had under development, it was 1,000 times too slow. This particular architect, Rocky, I forget Rocky's last name, there's Rocky in here, then sat and they were using a distributed object system to do this conversion of the data from EBCDIC format. How many of you know what EBCDIC is? Need some more historians in here. EBCDIC is basically the equivalent of what ASCII was, but back on IBM and other mainframes in the 60s and 70s. It was the character coding. They had to convert the data, which was in EBCDIC coding, to ASCII coding. And they're using this Corba distributed object system to do it. And Rocky sat down and wrote a 10-line C program using a lookup table that was 100 times faster. They were still 10 times too slow at that point, but at least they were starting to get within striking distance of what they needed. Okay. Gutless estimating. How many of you have had the experience of telling someone, I think it's going to take 6 months to do this, and they come back and say, no, we needed 3 months, or something equivalent. Have any of you had that experience yet? Anything you want to share?
When I was in high school, I actually did a proposal for this project that I was going to work on with a local business. It was a little website. And I budgeted out what I thought everything was going to take and how much it was going to cost. And they kind of looked at it and thought, oh, that's you know, and didn't listen to me at all. They didn't know what they wanted. The business ended up failing. It was ridiculous. But when I looked at what I had done and how long it took, I was exactly right, but I didn't stand up for the estimate.
Yeah. At Pages, when we closed on our funding, we hired our CEO, and he asked me to put together the schedule that I put together. And I showed it to him, and he said, this is too long. He said, this needs to be 6 months shorter. And I said, Larry, this is my best estimate from what I know now. And he says, this just isn't unacceptable. I want to schedule it 6 months shorter. And so I came up, tried to rework things, came up with a schedule that was 6 months shorter. But I printed out a copy of my original schedule and put it in my files. So when we missed his deadline, and he sort of called me on the carpet, came to my office, said, you know, I'm really unhappy, we're late, we're not sure what it is. I literally walked over to my filing cabinet, opened it up, reached in, and pulled out and said, here's the schedule I gave you originally, and you said this wasn't acceptable. And he turned around and left and never talked to me about it again. Which means if you're going to give an estimate, document it, keep a copy, and let them know that you think the schedule doesn't work. Completion date is picked because we have to have it by then or to meet a market opportunity, not based on any rational basis or realistic estimate. Have any of you been in that situation? You've had a project, it's like we need this by the end of the quarter. And your reaction is, it literally can't be done by then. Well, we need it by then. Yes?
Well, I mentioned this project I've been working on at work before, but I mean, to be frank, there was really not much in terms of like any rational reason for the way it was scheduled. And it's like, we'll have a plan to have a prototype done by the summer, but you know, it took me to the end of the summer for us to realize there was like no content to make out of our, for our training system, like let alone making an actual prototype. And it's been on hiatus ever since. But yeah, growth being underestimated, and just really no basis for the schedule that was made.
How many of you, since I always like to come back to the subject of games, how many of you had the experience of buying a computer game that was released too early? Usually in like October or November because they want to get the Christmas market and the game was horribly buggy. I've had several of those. I mostly think of Civilization 4, which was a disaster on release. Eventually it was a great game. Actually, still my favorite version of Civilization, but it was a disaster on release because they pushed it out for the Christmas market, and they were about 6 months away from being ready. So what happens when the project is late? Add people to it and work longer hours. Have you been in that situation where it's kind of like, yeah, we'll hire more people and we'll work overtime and we'll get this done? That doesn't work. Overtime works in short sprints, usually to solve specific problems. It is not a sustainable approach to software development. The only way you meet schedule is to slip the deadline and or drop features. And I will say that over and over and over again, but it's what you do. You scale back. You say, okay, you know, here are the 10 features we wanted, let's drop these 3, and then we might actually ship on schedule. Any observations or other feedback on this? Yes?
So I have an iPhone, and you get periodic software updates, right? And there's somewhat of a schedule to it, and it seems like it's always really buggy for the first several months after a big update. Do you think this is what's going on? They have a deadline, they're like, we have to ship by such and such date, so they do, and then...
Oh yeah, I think it's exactly what's going on, and it's a long-standing problem. It's a long-standing problem at Apple. Back when I was writing for Macworld magazines, that we're talking 30 years ago, Apple was coming out, the Macintosh operating system was version 6.x, and they were coming out with their new greatest release, which was the operating system 7.0. And as Macworld columnist, I was writing a column called State of the Mac. At the Macworld Expo, I had this one-on-one interview with the project manager for System 7. And he gave me the song and dance and demonstration and everything else, and then finally said, okay, so, Bruce, what do you think of it? And I said, I saw someone here at the Expo yesterday wearing a t-shirt that said, I'm waiting for System 7.0.1. I said, that's my feedback. You almost never want to upgrade to a .0 release. And I do the same thing with iOS. It's like they'll release like 11.0. It's like, no, I'm not going to update for probably 4 or 5 months because I want to get all those bugs out. And that's usually what happens. It's a release that's being done in order to meet the deadline, or we just simply can't slip it longer. And it's buggy as heck. Okay, Tower of Babel, as he likes to point out, they had a clear mission. They had manpower, materials, time, and technology, but they lacked communication and organization. That's it, pretty much is. We've actually. Oh, this is why. Remember, I said that your project manager and your chief architect have to be different people. Chief architects tend to be optimistic, like I was at Pages. You see everything, you know how it's all supposed to fit together, and you just assume everyone's going to see things the same way, and they're just going to clone your brain and solve all the problems simultaneously. What you need is the project manager who is taking a very realistic, cold look at what you're doing. How does a project get to be a year late? 1 day at a time. Oh, this is so true. This is so true. Projects usually don't slip. Well, actually, let me set that back. Projects get to be late 1 day at a time. Now, officially what happens is that you hold the deadline and hold the deadline and hold the deadline until usually about 3 weeks before your shipping date, and then you slip it. That was an observation I'd made with all my years of doing this, and I thought that was a great insight I had. And Fred Brooks mentions it in the Mythical Man-Month. He actually cites a study, I think, at IBM, that projects tend to slip 3 weeks before the scheduled shipping date. It is a truism, I can tell you that. Milestones of the project have to be concrete, specific, and measurable. How many of you have been in a project where people say, oh yeah, we're about 70% done? We're about 80% done, about 90% done. That's a meaningless statement. It's absolutely meaningless. Especially in the light of armor, because you don't know, unless you really truly have measurable concrete milestones and you understand everything you need to do to finish a project, and you know how long it's going to take. You just can't be that specific. 90-90 rule again, 3 weeks before deadline. Schools underestimates and schedule do not change significantly until about 3 weeks. That's what Brooks had. I was every time I think I've got something new, Brooks has got it there in Mythical Man. And this is why you need a per class schedule, which we're going to talk about. Any observations, questions, issues on this? Yes.
The status report that we do weekly?
Yes.
Don't we put on there like a percentage completion?
You can do that for individual tasks.
So what's the difference?
The difference there is you get to see each week whether or not you were actually that close. And if you have the same percentage completion for 2 weeks and either something has slipped or you're wrong in your estimate. What's most important with your tasks is finished or unfinished. The percentage gives you warm, fuzzy feelings saying, yeah, we haven't started. I mean, seriously, you could probably replace it with 3 values. Haven't started yet, underway, finished. The percentages give you some warm fuzzies. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Other problems. Not being willing to pass bad news appeal. You guys already read the Thermocline of Truth. Is that in your readings? Okay, that must be in a later reading that you've got, later Webster's thing. Who knows what a thermocline is? Yeah. How many of you have ever swum in a lake and you found that the top foot or so of the lake was very warm and then it got really cold underneath there? That's a thermocline. It happens in the ocean too. If you've been scuba skin diving, you may notice that the water feels good, and then you know a certain number of feet below, and all of a sudden it feels a lot colder. Well, my observation, and this dates all the way back when I was a contract programmer at Apple 30 years ago, is that you have a thermocline of truth within organizations. The people down in the trenches really know the status of the project. This is why when I'm called in to review a troubled project, the first thing I want to do is interview the actual people working in the trenches. And once I've talked to about 6 or 7 people, I pretty much know exactly where the problems are and what's going on. But what happens is that it's hard for good news or for bad news to get pushed uphill. If I'm a manager, if I'm somewhere in the middle there, my inclination is to say, oh yeah, things are fine, we're all mentally thinking, and we'll work a few extra weekends and we'll get caught up. And you have that kind of filtering going on. Sometimes it's just step by step, sometimes it's a very clear line where you simply have a level of management that's lying about the status of the project. And I have seen those projects, quite literally. But the result is that upper management doesn't know the true status of the project until, guess what? 3 weeks before the deadline. And the reason why is because as you get closer to the deadline, it's harder and harder to misrepresent the actual state of the project. Classic case of this, I got dragged into Y2K remediation at Fannie Mae. And a whole other set of stories there. But the goal was to have all remediation done by the end of 1998, and then spend all of 1999 doing testing to make sure everything was underway, because Fannie Mae does billions of dollars of transactions every month involving mortgages and is governed by the federal government and so on and so forth. Carol Teasley, best boss I ever worked for, she was the vice president of Fannie Mae. That I was over a bunch of OSG consultants and I reported to her, and she's one that dragged into Y2K, but I forgive her. So she was meeting weekly with the heads of all the divisions of Fannie Mae. And they had a green, yellow, red status that each division was supposed to give on their Y2K remediation. And like the first or second week of December of 98, so like we're looking 3 to 4 weeks before they're supposed to be done, she goes in for the weekly meeting, and up till then everyone's been reporting green and a few yellows. And all of a sudden everyone's reporting yellow and red. 3 weeks before, it's all yellow and red. And she looked around the room and said, okay, tell me what you know now that you didn't know a week ago, when everything was green. And there was a massive embarrassed silence. But there comes a point where you just can't hide it anymore. Sometimes you just don't know the news is bad. We're going to talk about that next. And we're actually going to talk about those. How many of you, have any of you been in an experience where you've seen this, where you knew down in the trenches that this project was not going well and upper management actually thought it was fine until you reached a certain point? Anyone want to share any stories? Yes?
I've interned at Microsoft 3 times, and the first year I was there, I was on a project that eventually became what is now being released as the Microsoft Duo, the folding screen tablet. But at the time, we were building a 3D virtual reality app to go on it. And I came in as an intern, lowest level. I was like, this seems a little, people are kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, this is the thing that people want, that it's gonna work. I was on the team that was building the actual software to do this 3D virtual reality stuff. And it was not working. And they said that they were gonna re-release it in a year. And I kind of did believe that management thought everything was fine. They were going and like demonstrating it to like the CEO of the company. Everything was going to be great. I came back for an internship the next year. The entire department was shut down. Like not just the department, like the fifth of the company that was under was shut down.
Yes, that does indeed sometimes happen. And you touched upon something that's important there, which is the assumption that this is what the customer wants. One of the vital lessons we learned at Pages is that beta testers are not end users. Beta testers have usually drunk the Kool-Aid also. They tend to be self-selected or you've selected them. Pages was this design-oriented desktop publishing system where you drop stuff in and it would automatically reformat, so it was always laid out according to professional design standards. We didn't have rulers, we didn't have things you could tweak because it was supposed to be in control of all that. When we shipped, the feedback we immediately got from actual users was, why isn't there a ruler? Why can't I sit and tweak stuff? Also, we got feedbacks, why isn't there WordPerfect key bindings? Our version 1.1 had a ruler and had WordPerfect key bindings. Also had Emacs key bindings. Yes?
So if I was going to start a business, and let's say it grows and it's massive, and I've got many people that report to me, and I'm the one that's due, thinking that we're on time, and everyone below me knows that we're really not. What do I do to ensure that that doesn't happen? Do I need to ask more specific questions to these people, or what's like the...
You go down, how many of you have seen Kenneth Branagh in Henry V? Great, my favorite Shakespeare movie. Go watch that. The night before Agincourt, big battle with the French, he disguises himself and goes wandering among the troops and listens to them. That's what you need to do. You need to go down among the engineers and let them know they can be honest with you. You need to pierce that thermocline. Like I said, when I'm doing these reviews, I can usually, within a few days of interviews, tell you exactly what's going wrong. And it's not because I have anything magic. I just go and talk to the engineers and say, what's the problem with the project? And I want a large enough sample that I'm not getting just a particular hobby horse of one given engineer or even a couple engineers. But usually if I've talked to several, and the more I talk to, the more sure I am, I will hear the same story over and over and over again. And then I can direct my review, be it source code, be it architecture, system design, and so on, and say, well, yeah, I see that actually is the problem. So that's what you need to do. You need to, first, people need to be, the people in the trenches need to know that not only are they safe in being honest with you, they are encouraged and rewarded in being honest with you.
That's kind of my next question is, I was specifically going to say, do you want to somehow have somebody other than the CEO go talk to them and say, like, anonymously, can you tell me something,
You can say, well, you can hire someone like me. I mean, that's literally what, I actually got sort of in trouble. And when I think about it, I worked for 3 years as Chief Technical Officer at Object Systems Group, and this is what we did a lot. We went in and helped large corporations with their projects. And my specialty was trouble projects and so on. And even after I left OSG, Tony Gibson, president, keep coming back and hiring me to do this. And one of the last ones I did was a review of project, big credit card company. And we did this review, and then we were meeting with the acting CIO and some of the upper management staff. And in that meeting, I laid out what we had found, and I said, I don't know why you even have hired us. I said, you have solid technical people right here within your company who will tell you exactly the same thing. You're just not listening to them. Tony was not happy with me saying, why do you have us in here? Because of course that's the whole company model. Is to have them bring us in. But my standing joke when I first started doing with this OSG, I said, this is, I'd spent years doing software development, software architecture, and everything else, and I started going through these troubled projects. And I said, here's the irony is, I'm getting paid big bucks, not for what I'm really good at, which is software architecture. I said, but for going in and doing what anyone could do and who has a bit of common sense. Going asking simply questions. But the fact that they're hiring me and I'm an expert, they're willing to listen to me. Whereas they should have been willing to listen to their staff and their middle managers all along. Okay, Parkinsons Law revisited. This chapter in Peopleware is mostly that some managers have this idea that work expands to fill the time allotted, therefore we won't give them much time and they'll get the work done faster. Well, Parkinson's Law was actually a satirical article, it was not an actual study. And you have the problem that bad estimates tend to lower productivity. How many of you have been on a project where there's a deadline that you know is unrealistic and you're not going to make it? How many of you? How does that make you feel? What's the impact on you to say, we can't make this? But, yeah?
I'm not going to commit emotionally to it because then it's going to be disappointing.
Yep. You start to detach, yeah?
Usually I'll still get attached to stuff and want to do a good job, but I'll spend sometimes hours just getting myself emotionally equipped to focus on it, just battling with all the frustration.
It's not fun to ship crap. It's embarrassing. And when companies are forcing you to ship crap, it's kind of like, this is awful. I don't want to do this. This is embarrassing professionally. I'm embarrassed to say I was associated with this product because it's got all these bugs. I think there were some other hands or anyone else wanted to observation. Yeah.
I have a question. So, in Peopleware, it kind of makes the assertion that most customers are okay with lowering quality for cost in the short. So in the short term, they lower quality to maximize profits, which is why we have to ship crap. And then he makes the argument that, but in the long term, if you make quality work, then your engineers are happier and they'll be more productive. And long term, your costs go down when you ship quality work, right? It's kind of his argument.
Yeah.
So, software hasn't been around as long as buildings, but we have been doing it for a while. Why is this why is this still such a struggle? It's if in the long term quality work really improves your profits, why haven't companies been natural selected to produce quality work? Why do we still have so many companies producing?
As I said, before Congress, pardon the name drop, saying that when asked why so many projects are late and over budget or fail altogether, one could just as easily cite the 7 deadly sins. Pride, envy, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, sloth. It's as good an answer as any and better than most. It is always for political and personal reasons. They want something for nothing. And it's companies that make a focus on quality tend to have quality. Steve Jobs, I knew Steve Jobs. I interacted with them a fair amount. First because I wrote the next book for Addison Wesley, and then because we were developing pages for the Next Step operating system. My relationship with him was not always a good one. My last conversation was him calling to yell at me for an article I wrote. But what Steve was very good at was demanding quality in the smallest things. Here's an example. Here's an example of Steve Jobs. I wrote the next book for Addison Wesley. This is all about the next computer, which is what he did between his 2 times at Apple. The next step operating system is what became Mac OS X when Apple bought it next. So I've been working on this book. It's finally out. It's out on shelves, and I call one of my contacts with the next and say, hey, you know, the book's out. Do I have any feedback from Steve? And he said, yeah, he's really upset. And I said, what's he upset about? He said, well, on the inside back flap, there's a picture of you on the front porch of your house in the Santa Cruz Mountains with the next cube next to you, and he can see fingerprints on the next cube. That's Steve. That upset him. He had tremendous attention to detail. And the motto at Next, and after he came to Apple, at Apple for a while, was, it just works. And that's what he demanded. He burned out people doing it, but he demanded quality. And one of the great losses at Apple since the death of Steve has been it doesn't just work anymore. I belong to a private email list of ex-people who worked at Next. I didn't, but I did the book, so most of them know me, and they let me be on the list. And there was just almost once every month or two a chorus of complaints about some of the latest software released from Apple and how crappy the quality is. Apple no longer means it just works. It's kind of like, I don't know. You know, there are problems with this version of the Mac OS X, there's problems with this version of iOS, there's problems with these laptops that released and so on. Let's talk here, we'll take a break after this. Lies, damn lies, and project metrics. Metrics are one of the biggest problems in software. The idea of a metric is once you have a project underway, how do you know how close you are to completion? And the problem is that most companies are very bad at this, and the metrics that are most often used aren't useful. How many of you have been on a project where they're counting lines of code as a metric? Good. That's an awful metric. It's counterproductive. If you're doing good refactoring and good design, your line count should actually level off and then maybe drop some. Except if you're adding new functionality. But to use as a metric of progress the number of lines of code you have sends exactly the wrong message. Now, to have a meaningful, useful metric, it has to have 3 qualities. It has to be informative or predictive. In other words, it actually has to tell you something about your project or something, a prediction about your project. Usually you want to know when you're going to ship, what you're going to ship. It should be objective, which means you should get the same value regardless of who's doing it, and preferably it should be automated. It's one of the reasons why lines of code has been popular for decades in software engineering, because it is objective and it's automated. You know, you have a little program or script or whatever goes through, counts up the lines of code. The problem is it has 0 predictive or informative value other than, say, your code base is a certain size. Almost all major metrics used lack one or more of those qualities, and so are generally useless. Okay, Weinberg, Jerry Weinberg. Any book by Jerry Weinberg is worth reading. I have about 7 or 8. He says that which gets measured gets fudged. So if you're measuring progress by lines of code, you know what's going to happen? People are going to start generating lots of lines of code. Especially if you're rewarding it based on that. There are classic stories, you'll find this in any number of variations, where you have companies that, trying to ship a project, start offering bug bounties. You know, we'll pay $50 for every bug closed. You know what happens? Programmers start inserting bugs, QA starts closing them, and they split the bounty. That which gets measured gets fudged. There's an excellent book for those of you interested in metrics. Take note of this, Measuring and Managing Performance Organizations by Robert Austin, which pretty much explains why most attempts to manage by metrics fail. It's this distorting effect. He outlines the conditions under which it can be useful, but it usually fails. We already talked the 90% thing. Metric law of least resistance. The more human effort required to calculate a metric, the less often, the less accurately it will be calculated. This is why it has to be automated and objective. Because if it's human, if a human has to go through and do this assessment, it's just, you're going to abandon it. It's going to get tiring. You're going to say it doesn't really tell us anything. Questions, comments, feedback? Before we move on. Yes?
So this is all very pessimistic. Are we going to get to the solution to this?
We are, actually.
Great.
Now, here's the problem with assessment. No one would confuse these four houses, would they? It's quite clear. One's a hole in the ground. One's under construction. One looks almost done there, but not quite. There's still some finishing work. And the last one, which is actually our house, is occupied functionally. It is very hard for anyone, but especially management, to tell the difference between four software programs in those conditions. How many of you have had the experience of trying to look at a project under development and estimating how close it is to completion? Have you had that experience? It's hard. You have to go in. It's like, well, there's this code. I think this works. I think this function is, complete. It's difficult. There is a visibility problem. Real life construction, someone who's never picked up a hammer in her or his life can look at that and say, yeah, those are, there's some similarities between those two, but they're clearly quite different from the other ones. Evaluating the state of completeness of software projects, is extremely difficult. And we're still being pessimistic, so. What you've got is this issue up here. Project started, you're somewhere here, and you want to know when the project's going to end. What are the problems? Well, you may still have analysis that you have to do, including possibly analysis you don't know that you have to do, but that's going to be done. The amount of invention, again, it's armor, that has to occur. The amount of discovery, running into roadblocks and dead ends, it still has to occur. The adequacy of the current architecture, design, and implementation, the amount of actual coding that still has to occur, and how quickly that will actually get done. The amount of quality engineering that has to occur, turnover among personnel, changes in market requirements and opportunities. You know what the number one failure factor of startups is? Nobody wanted the product. Number one failure factor. They raise the money, they build the team, they start producing the product, whether it's, how many of you walked by the as seen on TV shelves at stores or supermarkets? Okay. All of those were inventions that people thought were going to make them rich. A few of them occasionally succeed. Most of them, you look at them and say, yeah, that's nice, but I'm going to pass. You have the same thing happen in software. How many apps are there currently in the Apple App Store? I think it's a couple million. I could be wrong. How many apps do you use on a daily basis on your phone? 2, 5, I probably have, my phone is organized so that I've got the first screen are apps that I think I'm going to actually use, and the second screen are folders with apps that I may occasionally use. But really, in my case, there's probably less than 10 apps that I use in a given week out of the million or two that are on the Apple Store. Yet everyone who created those apps thought that they were going to make money doing this. Changes in external systems upon which you depend. This is the issue you had with the Windows API that was broken. How many of you have been in this experience of using a particular language, library, operating system, API, etc., and suddenly had it change, or suddenly found that it really wasn't doing what you expected it to do. Have you had that experience? I have, yeah. So this is why it's so hard to predict project completion. Now, this was back when I wrote these columns for Baseline, online CIO magazine, about 12 years ago. This was the idea. I said, first, what you probably want to do is instrument your project to collect a lot of automated data, and then do analysis after the end of a project and see what predicted it the best. I actually did this not in terms of project. One of my first project, or my first job out of college was at General Dynamics. And one of the projects I worked on there was proposed by an engineer. We're going back into the times of the Cold War. You had Europe divided in half, Soviet Union occupying all of Eastern Europe, NATO in Western Europe. You had what was called the Iron Curtain. And the Soviet Union had these battalions of tanks on its side of the Iron Curtain so that it could invade Western Europe in a moment's notice. The US had satellites and U-2 flights to look down and tell where they were. So what the Soviet Union did is it built plywood shells that looked just like tanks from above and put them on trucks. And so they literally had a shell game. They had these thousands of real tanks and fake tanks, and they could move them around, and satellite pictures or U-2 pictures, high-altitude spy-plane pictures, they would look the same. So what this engineer at General Dynamics was proposing was, that's looking from above, but if you're looking here, let's say this is an actual tank, having a helicopter with side-looking radar that would actually bounce off the tires or treads of these things. And what he wanted to know is there's some way, based on the radar signal, that you could tell whether or not that was bouncing off a real tank or a truck that simply had a shell in it. And he went out to Camp Pendleton, as it was all in San Diego, and got radar data, bouncing it off of tanks and wheeled vehicles at various instances. And then I wrote the program to do the analysis, Bayesian analysis, of the characteristics. There were 26 characteristics we had on radar signals. And we found that based on 3 characteristics, we could do a 95% identification. So in real time, the radar could bounce and you'd extract these 3 characteristics and say it's a tank or it's a truck. Okay? My proposal was basically to do that with project management. That requires gathering the data and then analyzing that. Now, the interesting thing was, I think it was a year ago, maybe a year and a half. It was a year and a half. It was back in fall of 2018. I gave this lecture. I had one of my students say, hey, I interviewed with this company called GitCrime. They seem to be doing this. And I actually met with GitCrime at Silicon Slopes a year ago. And they were. This is exactly what they were doing. They had this extensive instrumentation of your software development environment, GitHub and everything else. And they collected all this data, and then they could analyze it and say, here are the predictors for where you were in your project. GitHub has since been bought up by someone, but if you want to see someone who seems to be doing this in real life, I assume their gitprime.com still works. Okay, let's take a quick break here. We'll start again about 12 after. We'll do roll, and we've got one more lecture. I'm going to let you guys go. Next lecture will be shorter, I promise.